Yeah, thank you all so much for coming back here. I told both Chris and Angela, I had my overfull cup of coffee, which is like the bane of my life, just running down the stairs after I inhaled some yogurt because I went right into the Discord and I was just as engaged after that conversation too. Like, where are we finding hope? And we talked about languages and metaphors and whose voices are we listening to in these conversations, and where are we drawing those inspirations? I just found that ongoing conversation to be really fulfilling, just bringing that energy back into the Discord space, and then hopefully back in here. I mentioned at the top of the previous one that I find that there is a sort of unintentional thread winding these workshops together, just tackling a lot of really big important chunks of the work that we've been talking about in the rest of it too, from day one with Naval and nourishing caregiver collaborations, yesterday's breakout rooms with Dr. Emma McMain, and then making the pedagogical connection here, stewardship, and community through that lens of pedagogical documentation. I can't wait to see where that takes us today. So thank you so much, Angela, for taking the time here, and let's get started.
I am so grateful to see all of you friendly faces in the room. The benefit I was just telling Nick and Chris of being on day three is y'all have had a chance a little bit to get to know one another maybe and warm up into some of the work that we're going to do today. I really want this to feel like a conversation. There will be lots of opportunity for you to chat, but I do invite you to interrupt me at any time. Just jump in, unmute, ask the questions that you want to ask. We are a fairly small group. I've dropped my slides into the chat for all of you. I want you to have them for a couple of different reasons. One, I've linked some resources in there that you're welcome to take a deep dive into even after our session's over. And also, we're going to have some, I think, chewy conversations and some of the provocations and questions that I'm putting into the slide. You want to carry them with you into some breakout rooms today so that we can chat with one another. When we do go into breakouts, Chris, Nick, you want me to do that or do you do that typically? Do I have the power invested in me?
Either
Yeah.
or, you have the
All
power.
right.
So if you want to
Okay.
mess with it, go ahead.
I'll, yeah, and what I was going to say is I'm going to break it into big groups because I know that some people have to take care of other things and you may not be fully with us in this moment. But I want us to be able to really have some pretty human conversations today. And I want to be able to share. What's exciting to me is I get to actually talk with colleagues about the work that I'm doing. And I really do want your insight and your feedback. And I hope that, you'll share some things you're noticing that I may not be noticing. I'm going to talk a little bit about work that I've done over the years, but also work that I've been doing over the last 2 days, because people gave me permission to share, and it was pretty exciting. And exciting is, you know, it's a state that I think a lot of us are having a hard time reaching right now. So I was driving home yesterday. It was a long drive. And I thought to myself, wow, I feel very privileged to be feeling so good coming out of a school this week. And I want to share all of that with you and hopefully leave you feeling really seen and heard and cared for today, and leave you with some very practical tools that you can take back into the spaces that you learn and work in, so that you can help others feel that way as well. If you want to drop an introduction into the chat, I welcome you to do that. I'm going to kind of dive in just because I want to be able to respect your time today, and I will have so many other conversations that I'd really like to have with you. Can someone give me a thumbs up? Are you able to see my slides right now? Yeah, awesome. So today we're going to be talking about pedagogical documentation, which is a mouthful. And those of you who are familiar with it know that this is really about documenting learning by taking pictures, capturing audio and video, looking closely and listening, capturing what we observe and what we hear using multimedia tools in any learning context. But for our work today, we'll talk about it in terms of our work, perhaps with students in classrooms and learners in learning spaces, and maybe even through the lens for those of you for whom this is relevant of facilitating professional learning and facilitating change, particularly during really complex times. I have a lot of pictures that I'm sharing, and I want you to know, and this is important, I have consent to share everything that I'm sharing with you today. And it's one of the big conversations that I'll kind of probably keep looping back toward is, who owns the stories that learners share? This is something I think about and I take very seriously. So I am going to be sharing images today. I am going to be sharing some case studies and learning stories. And in every case, these are children who know very well that they are professional learning facilitators, that their stories they help and to inspire teachers to consider things that they might not have before, and administrators too, and other kids. So the children in the slides and their stories that I share with you today, I do loop back to them to let them know where their stories have been shared and how their stories are shaping people's thinking well beyond the writing studio that I founded or the classrooms that I work in. And it's the same with teachers too. And in fact, there are some teachers that you might want to be able to connect with after today is over. And I'm happy to do that as well. I want you to think about that whole notion of who owns the story. We are all, in my opinion, teaching and learning and leading inside of education's most complex moment. You're probably working with the most complex learners that you've ever encountered in your career. I know for sure that I'm working with the most complex teachers, administrators, and systems inside of a world that is incredibly unpredictable. And it was quite a while ago now that I realized that I was kind of full of it as a so-called literacy expert. And I kind of took a step down off of the pedestal that a lot of people were kind of putting me on once in a while. I've been facilitating professional learning in school districts for almost 25 years. And I've worked in lots and lots of different systems to do all kinds of wonderful work around curriculum, instruction, assessment. I'm very passionate about inquiry-based learning. But what I realized is that regardless of the best practice, if we weren't documenting our learning and seeking really diverse perspectives around what we thought was happening and sharing together in order to really interpret that evidence, we didn't know for sure whether those best practices were really best for our students in really different contexts that we were in. And then once I started working in that capacity, I realized it was really easy for me to take stories that were unfolding in one context and bring them into another. And I always had a way of telling them. And when I started publishing and sharing those stories and writing books and blog posts and sharing things online, I would invite some of the teachers and the children that I worked with to be in those spaces with me. When I wrote different chapters of my book, or you're going to see case studies later today that are attached to them, I always shared them back. And 9 times out of 10, the child or the teacher that I was working with said, "That's not how I remembered that happening." And it's really pushed my thinking around not only who owns the story, but who gets to count themselves as characters, right? And who gets to claim the role of protagonist. And I kind of believe that it depends on every single person. And we all have our own story to share from inside of a context. And there are facts, and there are things we observe, and there are things that we hear. But truth is a very different thing, and we all kind of have our own. So, as we talk about pedagogical documentation today, this practice of gathering rich, warm data in the form of images and audio and video and artifacts of learning, I really want to frame it as an opportunity to serve as stewards to multiple truths and to really feel okay giving ourselves permission to not have answers or to lack confidence, and especially to have to position ourselves as authorities or experts. Because I think so much of what is rewarding and hopeful and meaningful about the work that I'm going to share with you and the ideas and strategies that I offer is that it gives us permission to just be really authentic and to not know. And in the not knowing, so many other gorgeous things kind of emerge. So I want you to open up your phone and I want you to look at your photo album in your phone. We're all documentarians. We are all, without invitation, provocation, or any sort of mandate, we are all every single day just about capturing a lot of really gorgeous qualitative data on our phones. We take pictures, usually of things that we want to remember. I am going to offer you this lens. Look into your photo album on your phone, if you would. I want you to locate a handful of pictures, maybe 10, where you remember feeling awe-inspired joy, not just general joy, but you can remember maybe getting chills up your spine or tears maybe rising in the back of your eyes or any of those embodied markers that you have been awestruck and it's making you joyful. I want you to take a few minutes to try to find some of those images on your phone. And in a minute, I'm going to put you in your first breakout room and I want you to talk about them. I'm not going to ask you to share them, and I want to protect your privacy there. You can hold them up if you want to throw them in a different in the chat or in a different place so people can see them directly. That's your choice. I just want you to be able to tell the story behind some of those pictures and talk with people about moments that brought you that kind of joy. I'm setting up breakout rooms. And I'm going to put you in groups of about 6 or 7. If you end up in a room and it looks like no one else is joining you, pop back out and I'll drop you into another one. When you get into the room, I just want you to say hi to the people that are there and take a minute or two to talk about at least one of the photos that you've captured and how it brought you joy. We're going to stay in these rooms for about 10 minutes. They're open. Hey everyone, welcome back. We're just waiting for the other group to scoot back into the room. There were, I think, and I'm not sure in room 1, but in room 2, certainly, I think some unexpected stories were shared. And I was reminded of the dialectical nature of joy and how when we think about being awestruck, how that is so closely associated with authenticity. I know that it seems like that activity was really just kind of a warm up. And I'm easing you into looking at photos because photos are one of the ways that we can engage in pedagogical documentation. They're also a way that we document our lives and their data. They're data that can help us get under the hood of all of those quantitative data that we tend to rely on so much. I have stories to share with you today and ideas for all of you to consider, but I want to lead you through a really quick but very powerful data analysis activity. And I want to do this so that you can feel the potential for pedagogical documentation to help you notice things that you wouldn't have otherwise. I grabbed a handful of photos myself from my own photo album and I dumped them on this screen. And you'll notice, probably just like you, on this first slide, they're kind of all mixed together. they don't necessarily seem to relate. But the next thing that I did was I started to create these clusters. All of these pictures here are concerts that I've gone to in the last year. And in the upper right corner, you're going to see pictures of places where I went hiking and was just completely awestruck by nature. And in the lower corner, these are photos from my garden. I'm a huge gardener. Each of these clusters has something in common: concerts, hiking, and gardening. These are places where I have experienced awe-inspired joy. And if I were to code these data, certain things would rise to the surface when I'm looking at those concert photos. It's mostly women. When I think about the music that I heard there, the lyrics really resonated and helped me think differently about tensions I'm grappling with in my own life, and they always have. When I look at the images from where I was hiking, I could tease out fine details like water and sky. And when I look at my garden, I really start to realize that it's the jumble of flowers that I really love the most. When I think about what I learned from documenting awe-struck moments of joy, the questions that I ask myself about these data really matter. As you're remembering different moments of awe and inspired joy yourself, what subtle and perhaps surprising patterns exist within them? When I think about the music that I listen to and the fact that it resonates so much with issues that I'm grappling with, or when I'm hiking, how breathtaking the sky might be, and I notice that water, I appreciate it, or the jumble of those flowers. What I realize is that when I'm experiencing awe-inspired joy, I haven't controlled any of it. I didn't plan for it. I didn't expect that moment to happen. I wasn't responsible for creating the budget for it or the strategic plan or the theory of change. I wasn't responsible for calculating anything, assessing its effectiveness, making sure that it got done on time. What I realized by doing this activity myself is that when I'm most joyful, it feels like Mother Nature or some sort of brilliant artist has given me a gift, and I didn't have to do anything to be worthy of it. That's profound. And I'm wondering if you sit with these questions yourself, if this simple walk through your photo album and your ability to notice patterns across photos that represent moments of joy can help you think through what your embodied experience was. How did it feel in your body? And what could you do to recreate that state more often? If you were to use what you've learned about joy from this data analysis work that we're doing together, what circumstances would you have to recreate in order to feel joy more often? What internal states would you strive for? And how would you do this? I think about this relative to my professional work often. And before we hopped on this call, I was telling Chris that I left West Valley Central School District yesterday. I've worked there for 6 years. These are teachers who I've done my deepest documentation work with. And I felt such an incredible sense of peace driving home yesterday in the car, and also deep gratitude. And I told my husband, when I retire, I will have worked in hundreds of different schools. They are one of the top three that in the nursing home I will be telling people stories about, because they have just brought me such incredible joy. And it feels in that context like peace. This is the process that I just moved you through. It is exactly the same process that I use with teachers all the time. It's a three-step process. If you are game storming fans, and I know one of you is in the room, Trevor, it's the same process. We document individually, we capture what we see and hear. We might not even know what it means. We might not even go back and look at it right away. We do it individually, and then we bring all of that data together. And I'm going to show you what it looks like when teachers come together and they share pictures and video, and they have stories that they're telling orally, and when they have lots of artifacts of learning to share as well. I'll show you what all of that looks like in just a minute. But what we look for are patterns and trends across all of those different things, all of those different items that we're working with. We look for those patterns and those trends, and hunches and really good theories start to emerge. And we don't typically need to do that with testing in order to make a really big difference. We don't have to test. The stories that I'm going to tell you today, I want to make sure that I link all of them to really practical suggestions and practical applications. But I want to stop right here and invite, because there's some really great conversation going on in the chat. I want any of you to just unmute and tell your own stories. How does this connect to what you do or what you've seen others doing? Who are the people that learn this way, that work this way? Maybe who do it a little bit differently. I'm going to be quiet for a second. I want y'all to talk. Share what you're putting in the chat. Anyone can unmute and go.
So I was sharing about the distinction between quantitative and qualitative evaluation and so forth. And one reason, so I used to be a math assessment director, and I quit that job because I realized we were actually throwing away all of the student voice. The only thing that we're counting are the performance metrics in terms of what students do correctly. We're not actually listening to the voices being expressed in the things that aren't getting credit. And that just really bothered me. And there was an awful lot that we were being told about what was wrong with our approach to teaching math, and we were just ignoring those voices.
That's really powerful, Don. And one of the things that I'm always sort of wrestling with, even as we document learning and we try to capture all of these rich sorts of stories through photos and audio and video, sometimes we miss the moment. Something awesome happens, and a piece of that learner's story is not captured, it's not recorded. And it feels like, oh, we got it wrong, or we didn't document the right way. And what you're reminding me of is how easy it is to just ask a kid to capture something on their way out the door. Scribble a sticky note. If you don't capture the exact moment where the awesome thing happened, you can jot a note to yourself. You can remember that that happened. You can ask students to go back even after that moment has passed and try to capture it. And that can be really powerful. How about the rest of you? Do you have stories of your own or people that you know who are learning this way and learning about learners this way? Anyone? Go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, I wish I could speak really more directly to what I'll share, but I have a real good friend and colleague who is a math specialist in a kind of mid-size district. I mean, when I mid-size for Ohio, so so remember we have city school districts, not county school districts. So anyway, it's Aurora Schools in Portage County, so kind of, I mean, it's south of Cleveland, maybe 45 minutes or so. And they have done some incredible work with really with the direction of their district administrators over the last several years now, at entirely reframing how they do assessment and evaluation of students, especially in K-5, but they're working into the middle school and high school as well, kind of on a sort of a piloting kind of basis in different courses. But essentially they've moved virtually entirely away from grades, and they still have to give state standardized assessments because Ohio. But within their district, the teachers are using a system that they've created. I mean, the system itself is via computers. It's electronic, but it's all about narrative, multimedia kinds of evidence, moving toward particular goals that they like, big goals that they've set. Excuse me. And the goal is also to help students really be as much a part of that process as they can be. So for a public district to be doing this, it's just really great to see. And if anybody's like especially interested in contacting them, I can certainly.
Where is this?
So Aurora Schools, it's in Portage County, Ohio,
Okay.
which again is the best way to place it is about 45 minutes south of Cleveland, so south of Lake Erie. It is I would call it a suburban district with a little bit of ruralness to it. But I'm just trying to think about how many. I want to say there are maybe I'd have to look up. I think there are maybe around 200 kids in a class. I mean, give or take some. So in a graduating class.
So Kim,
Not
I'm going to be
huge.
staying in touch with you.
Okay.
I'm not sure how many of you are from New York State. I know a few of you are because I see Beth here. Hello, Beth. It's good to see you. The New York State Department of Ed has just recently decoupled our standardized Regents exams from our graduation measures and outcomes. And there was something that launched this year called the New York State Plan Pilot. We have 34 school districts who are going in the direction that Kim is describing, where we still have to give our Regents exams, but no student will fail to graduate from high school if they fail the Regents exam, as long as they've demonstrated mastery of our Portrait of a Graduate competencies that our Portrait of a Graduate was just approved last week. I have facilitated 2/3 of the professional learning in New York State for that work with our planned pilot schools, and we are so hungry to be connected to other people who are doing this work. So now I'm going to be your new best friend, Kim. Thank you very much. We'll
Sounds
be in
great.
touch.
I look forward to it.
See, this is why I let people talk, because then I don't have to present anything at all. Y'all just do the work for me, and then I can partner with you after. But anyway, thank you. That's beautiful. In the interest of time, I want to move us forward a little bit. You're all sharing amazing stuff in the chat. So if you are bored and not interested in what I have to say, please hit that up. But I want to talk about this guy for a minute. Hanif Abdurraqib is the poet laureate of Ohio. And if you were at NCTE a couple of years ago, there was this awesome moment where one of the keynote speakers failed to show up. And they gave Hanif a call because it was in Ohio and he lived there and he showed up. And I am telling you, in decades of going to NCTE, it was one of the most moving keynotes that I've ever been a part of. And at one point, he told a story about how, as he became more influential in the field and gained more recognition as a poet and an essayist, and a cultural critic too. Some of his friends asked him why he was still living in Ohio, and in the hood specifically, is how he put it. And he said that he would live there till his dying day because he saw it as his incredible honor to be able to write about the things that happened there and even the heartbreak, and how the hard things that happened, that when we write about them, we dignify them. And in that moment, I realized that that's why I value documentation so much as a teacher and also as someone who facilitates professional learning in a sustained way, and all the good, the bad, and the ugly that comes with it. When we document even the hardest learning experiences where we are feeling really disillusioned and maybe even hopeless, we dignify that learning. It matters. And I can think of no other moment in time, especially for educators, where these stories of navigating the hard and the seemingly hopeless give us an opportunity to dignify so much of what it is we're here to do, even when it feels like all might be lost. I don't believe that. And I think that it's really important that we're sharing these hopeful stories. Documentation gives us the evidence that we can ground those decisions in, that we can ground the assumptions that we're making in, that can really help us check our biases. I'm going to stop sharing for just 1 minute, and I want to move you into a breakout room again for just a moment. I want you to riff on that a little bit in that breakout room. What is the relationship that you notice between Hanif's words? When we write about what happened to us, we dignify it, and this moment we're living through as educators. How can documentation be a really powerful tool here? I'm going to put you in breakout rooms just for 5 quick minutes, but I'd love for you to have that conversation. And I'm mixing up your groups a little bit too. Go ahead. They are open. So I don't want to pretend like we are all teaching or leading or learning inside of some perfect moment, because we aren't. Things are incredibly uncertain. There is tragedy unfolding every day around all of us, and the future of school is not something that I can necessarily predict. But here's what I know. Everything might blow apart tomorrow, but we have today, and it still really matters. And the micro moments that you have with your colleagues and leaders, and most especially your students, they're creating memories that we're going to be able to savor when the going gets tough. And if we can dignify the hard stuff, we can sit with it in a way that might be intolerable otherwise, and we can tease the light out of it. At the very least, we can find the lessons inside of it. I don't know how many of you have worked in situations where schools have closed or the state has been called in and horrible things are happening or just happened. We've lived through a global pandemic at this point. We're tipping on the edges of tyranny if we're not fully invested in it at this point in this country. And we're grappling with so much loss. If we take a really wide view, we're living through incredibly interesting and important times in American history. And if for no other reason than that, they deserve to be documented in every single context. These stories matter even when they're hard. And when I think about that myself, I want to be able to share with you practical things as well. And I want to be able to give you stories and ideas and approaches that you can kind of take back to your own context. So I was thinking about sharing what I'm doing in West Valley. That's the school that I've been in for the last 2 days, but I've been there for 6 years. It's a very small rural school. And when Dr. Fine in the keynote mentioned how so much of the best work that's happening right now is happening in small, fringe places, that it's happening on the margins, that's West Valley. West Valley is a rural school district about an hour from my home in New York State near the Pennsylvania border. They're small, and a lot of their kids come from rough places. A lot of them are poor. The teachers in that district, many of them have been there for years. Their own children came through that system. They know one another well, outside of school too. And when I was invited to begin work with this particular school district just before the pandemic, maybe a year or two before, I was handed these data. Drop into the chat and tell me, when you see these data, what story do they tell you? Drop into the chat and leave me some ideas there. What story do these data tell? you're thinking on that, I'll tell you that it was typical practice in this particular place and in a lot of places that I work in at that time to look at 1 year's worth of New York State assessment data, find out where the red was, define that as a gap, and then go back into the classroom and skill and drill that to death to try and improve performance. Instead of looking at 10 years worth of assessment data or getting a sense around, well, actually, reading standards 2, 3, and 5 are comprising almost 60% of that test. We had to push thinking. We had to challenge the stories that were being told. So we looked at these data for English language arts and we realized that 60% of the test is aligned to 3 standards. When we looked at the curriculum that was in place, only 50% of that curriculum even offered students the opportunity really to learn in alignment with those standards, and none of the students were demonstrating mastery. And I know that at least a few of the teachers in the rooms that I was in initially, they were expecting me to put common formative assessments in place as well as benchmarks. They were expecting me to mandate the curriculum that they would teach. They were expecting me to rely on hyper alignment and selected response and constructed response tests in order to improve performance. But that's not what we did. Instead, we started talking with students and asking them, what was difficult when they were reading and writing, where they felt proud of themselves or confident in their abilities? I talked with teachers about this as well. And we agreed that students did seem to be struggling to identify main idea, and they did seem to be struggling to find text details or other evidence to support it in multimodal texts. And they were having a difficult time understanding how the parts of a text related and sequencing as well. These are kind of important things. We want students to be able to do these things, even if there is no test. But strangely enough, that is what reading standards 2, 3, and 5 are all about. And the reason why New York State assesses them so heavily is because they want to ensure that learners graduate knowing how to do that stuff. And it's efficient and cost effective to give a standardized test to find out about that. But we don't need to create more of that in the classroom. We already have that data. Why would we create more tests, I suggested, that would just give us that same level of information? So we wondered how we might improve performance, because in my world, those tests, they still matter. And no amount of me saying we should just blow up the system and, rebel, they determine the cost of houses in New York State. They determine where people are going to live. And I would love to be able to say that they don't matter, but they do. So the question becomes, how do we improve performance, but do it in a way that's super engaging for kids, that honors them, that makes them feel and recognize that they're respected and that they're seen? And how do we help teachers develop that same sense about themselves and their place in school as well? We looked at between 5 and 10 years at each grade level of that test data. We realized that those were the skills. We agreed we would want them to be able to do that well, even if they weren't necessarily going to be taking a standardized test. We looked at the curriculum and realized it wasn't even touching on what we needed it to. And we did something really bold. We asked the building principal and the superintendent if we could get rid of every single bit of test prep and seated on-demand testing in the classrooms, K-12, as well as traditional grades, K-6. We're working on it in the middle school and high school. And they trusted us and said we could try. So we relied on pedagogical documentation. I work in documentation cycles with these teachers. I visit every 6 to 10 weeks. Teachers come to the table and they share their learning stories. They talk about how they taught around those skills as well as dispositional practices. Like they're really interested in trying to figure out what makes kids spark because engagement has been tough with this group. Attendance can be hard with these learners. They're really trying to figure out what they're interested in, what brings them hope and makes them want to come to school. We document every 6 weeks we get together and teachers sit at a table and they throw their pictures on a table. They bring artifacts, they bring their anchor charts and evidence of the lessons that they've taught. They're not all doing it the same way. They're not following a strict curriculum. And this is what it looks like in those rooms. This is my friend Natalie Galvin. I just met with her yesterday. She uses a tool called Otter, which is a speech to text tool that is augmented with artificial intelligence. So it not only flips her story and her students' stories into text, it also codes the data and notices trends. So when she interviews 6 students in her class, and those interviews last 5 or 10 minutes, and then when I talk with Natalie and it's a 30-minute conversation, Otter summarizes the conversation and pulls out the patterns and trends as well as any action items that we've developed. It's helping us serve kids better. The definition of triangulation in this district has shifted. We talk about triangulating our data and having multiple measures all the time, but so often when I walk into schools, those measures look like on-demand, selected response, constructed response tests, whether they're benchmarks, common formative assessments, standardized assessments. There's this assumption that if we have 3 or 5 of those things, we're triangulating our data, and I can't get under that. It's all telling me the same thing. It's basically the same measure. So in West Valley, we define triangulation as the exploration and inquiry work into the tasks that students, engage with, but we're also making behavioral observations and interviewing them to get at tendencies as well as talk. And documentation is essential here. This is a data point. Drop into the chat for me. What do you see here? Don't make a judgment about it, but what do you see? I'd love to have all of you drop an idea into the chat. I'm interested in what might repeat. And then I'll tell you what the context was here. What do you see? Yeah. Common focus, attentiveness, focus, listening. Students sharing their artwork. Young people and adults are all very focused on something. The focus is what's repeating. I'd ask you to consider where the teachers are positioned in this lesson. I'd ask you to consider where I'm positioned as the professional learning facilitator. There's a lot here that's interesting to think about. Here's the context. I work largely in Western New York. There are 26 component school districts in Western New York State. I work as a professional learning facilitator in a handful of them. But what I really wanted to be able to do was to bring teachers together outside of the school system across districts. So in 2008, I founded something called the Western New York Young Writers Studio. It exists outside of the public school system, and lots of the teachers that I work with in schools come there to engage in action research and learn about pedagogical documentation. Their students come there too. We work in multi-age groups, K-5, 6, 12. We meet for weeks in the summer and on weekends during the school year, and we do action research together. Our students are our teachers, and here you have students in 3rd grade, 5th grade, and 7th grade sharing storyboards for stop motion videos that they were planning to create. And these students were teaching us about peer review. And we were documenting our learning about peer review and what students had to teach us about it. This is a data point. Pedagogical documentation, though, it thrives inside of student or learner-centered cultures where teachers are decentering themselves and intentionally putting themselves on the margins inside of lessons. The powerful thing about pedagogical documentation is that when we step away from the front of the room and create learning experiences that are led by students, it frees us up to actually just become the learner and document the learning. I've made several study tours now to Reggio Emilia, Italy, which is the home of pedagogical documentation. And the beautiful thing about Reggio is that teachers there have pedagogistas and documentarians who partner with them in their classrooms. In America, lots of us have co-teachers, and there they have partners who do the documentation work for them. So that leads a lot of people to assume, well, that can't happen here, and especially in New York State, because I would need someone to document for me. And it is true that shifting from the posture of the teacher to the posture of the documentarian is very demanding work. And that's why structures like Jigsaw, Socratic Seminar, inquiry-based learning, project-based learning, it pulls the teacher away from the front of the room. And it also frees up time often for us to be able to do this work. When we document learning, we try not to rush to judgment. We go into the work trying to capture something, and we document what we see by taking pictures, capturing video, gathering artifacts. And we also document what we hear, usually by using audio of some kind. I want you to listen in, and I'm going to drop you into the middle of a learning story. This is my friend D. I'm protecting his name. That's his first initial. When he walked into my writing studio in 2021, I had already spoken with him and Mom about the fact that he is a self-proclaimed hater of writing. And I knew that the moment he walked into studio, I was going to document the very first choice that he made. I was going to document the first thing that he did. So he walked into my studio and he dropped his bag, and we were all working on creating a hook for a story. And he reminded me that he hated writing and he wasn't good at it. He reminded lots of people that whole week that his teachers thought that he was not a good writer, that they were worried about him as a writer. And the first thing that he did in 2021 was he picked up some Play-Doh and those foam blocks and he built this tree. And I walked over to the edge of his table and I said, "What are you making?" And he said, "The beginning of my story." And I asked him if he would share it with me, if it was ready, whole enough to share. He had like 20 minutes and he said, "Sure." I want you to listen to what he shared, and I want you to know that he's not reading anything. He's simply performing. I'm going to click on here, and I want to make sure I have my audio on for you all. Go. Somebody give me a thumbs up in 1 second and let me know.
Sam, that's the first thing Bob felt when he awoke. Bob was a skinny thing with almost no meat on his scrawny little bones. He has brownish blonde hair that's always standing on end. Bob tried to get up, he took a step, and slipped on the wet pebbles. "Ow," he groaned.
It'll fix it. Keep going.
Then he got up again, half walking, half sliding. He thought to himself, "I gotta quit whimpering and find my dragon." And with that, he marched across the sand. Then he saw it, a green lump whimpering away. That's when he felt it, a sharp pain. He fell to his knees with a pain as if his bones had just shattered into a zillion tiny little pieces. He screamed in pain, wondering if it was the last thing he would ever do.
He didn't read that. He stood at the edge of his desk, pointing at what he had built, and he performed that. He also fell to his knees when Bob fell to his knees. That's a fourth grader. I don't know what y'all teach, but I taught eighth grade, and I didn't have eighth graders who could write a hook like that in 20 minutes. What we learned that week is that when Devin had the opportunity to use materials to represent his ideas, and when he could speak them aloud, he was producing a far more sophisticated story than every other writer in the room. The next year, when he walked into studio, I took care to document the very first thing that he did. He opened up his computer where he had a draft that was almost 50 pages long because he kept building that story all year and using Otter to support it. When I looked over his shoulder, I noticed something interesting about the draft, and this is a bit of documentation too. You'll notice that some of the words are faded. And so I said, is something wrong with your laptop? Like is something broken? I don't understand. And he looked at me like I was the stupidest person on earth, and said, well, no, I need my story to sound a certain way when people read it aloud. I need them to say, hello, Dragon Slayer. And if I make the font lighter, they'll know they need to lower their voice. Do you know fourth graders who typically think like this about their writing? Devin is an incredibly oral, AURAL writer. He writes by thinking about how his story will be heard, not how it's seen in terms of letters and words. Documentation captures not only what we've learned, it captures who we are, and it captures how we're changed by the learning. Seeing learning this way is an act of care. And so in West Valley, we started doing something interesting this year. I work largely with women who love to scrapbook, K-12. And my daughter, who is a designer, left this massive artist pad behind last summer. I took it into West Valley this year. And this is how we have been documenting our learning. Every 6 to 10 weeks when we meet, teachers build a scrapbook page with kids and they tell their learning story. And I use Otter to capture the stories that kids and teachers share. We've added QR codes to these notebooks so that you can see the pictures. You can see the artifacts and student work samples. You can see their process work. You can also hear the stories that the kids and teachers are telling. And Otter helps us find the trends. If documentation is really about showing up authentically and using the full range of the tech tools that we have available to capture as much of the whole of a learner's story as we possibly can, if it's about capturing not the product of learning, but making thinking and learning visible, it, for me, comes down to the change. One of the most powerful questions that I will ask grown adult learners as well as children is, how did your thinking change today based on what we've learned or how we've learned? I wonder how your thinking has changed this week. How has your thinking changed today? I wonder how thinking changes you. When we invite children and adults to grab pictures and sticky notes and written reflections and audio and video, as they're doing it, we don't really know what it means. We just know that it made us felt a certain way. So when you walked into the Zoom room earlier today and we started, I asked you to think about the embodied experience of joy. How does it feel in your body when you're joyful? In West Valley, we talk with children about how does it feel in your body when you're learning? That's when you take the picture. It's been a very important move that we've made because so often when we put a camera, a phone in someone's hand, a device, when we tell them to jot a note, when we ask them to document learning and we start teaching and all of it starts unfolding, oftentimes people don't know what to grab. I'm not sure what I should take a picture of. I'm not sure what artifact represents when I was learning. All of this has taught me a lot about how completely detached we are from our bodies. And our bodies can give us really good information if we pay attention to how learning feels. How does it feel when you're wrestling with something? How does it feel when you're satisfied by a solution or a bit of knowledge? Inviting students to consider how their body feels when they're learning and to notice sparks that are not just mental, but also physical, helps them determine what they want to document. We also start to notice what's happening outside of the direct learning time. When I walked into West Valley yesterday morning at 7:30, this is what I saw. And I took a picture of it because I felt my heart leap when I saw it. School's been out since June. That notebook I showed you, that scrapbook a few minutes ago, it lives in the professional development room at West Valley. When I came in yesterday, Natalie and Emily were drinking their morning smoothies and they were paging through that scrapbook before I even arrived. The room was quiet and they were absolutely
think we lost Angela. We'll see if we can get her back. We made it almost to the end without a singular tech faux pas, but we're getting there.
You got me?
You're back.
All right. What was the last thing that you heard me say? I'm so sorry. I usually don't have an unstable connection like this.
They were drinking their morning smoothies and
Yeah. So this is evidence for me as a professional learning facilitator. It is evidence that the way that we're going about documenting learning is actually meaningful to these teachers. And I know that it's meaningful because they were revisiting it without invitation before I even walked in the room at 7:30 in the morning. It also has me thinking about the fact that we've done things with, I use Unruler, we've used Google Slides to document, I've used learning walls a la Jessica Vance to document. I've used a lot of different learning panels, documentation panels, Italy style. This was the first year that we built scrapbooks. And the superintendent told me that a superintendent from another school asked to borrow the scrapbook and bring it to his school. The scrapbook is moving. It's being transferred from one person to another. And it's also, I think, inspiring this sort of cozy up around the learning stories sort of vibe that no other tool really has before. And so, as the professional learning facilitator who is coaching documentation, I'm documenting my learning as well. I'm being reflective, and it's giving me such incredible hope. One of the strategies that I want to leave you with, because I'm talking a lot about how can we decenter ourselves in this work? How can we learn directly from the source? Like Luke, who here is 4 years old, and he is in my writing studio. We used an approach designed by Amanda Lotz. Her book, which is on this slide, it's called Photo Voice Research in Education and Beyond, a practical guide from theory to exhibition, game changer for my documentation work. This chart hung on the wall in my studio for a year. We used the photo acronym. We made intentional time to pause, and I would ask students every maybe 20 minutes or hour or so, I wanted them to stop and think about where they were proud of themselves, where they were struggling with something, and I had them take pictures. At the end of every lesson, I had students meet in these mixed age level groups. You're going to see Michaela, our intern, in that room as well. She's the taller one with the long brown hair. She facilitated this conversation. Luke held his photo in his hand on his device, and he described the picture that he took. He told us what was happening in his picture, why he was proud of himself, or what frustration he was wrestling with as a writer. And then he had to think about, what does your picture tell all of us about what it means to be a writer? And you can't see it here, but I've highlighted the O. How can we use your story as an opportunity to grow as teachers? Luke had a hard time answering that question because he's 4. Around age 9 and all the way through high school, students were very forthright with us about how we could teach them better. Here's my documentation. This is the picture I took. Here's what's happening in my picture. Here's what it taught me about what it means to be a writer. Here's what it could teach you about how to teach writing better. And we're humbled by that. And I have to tell you, the most joyful moments I've had as a teacher were when we were debriefing those sorts of questions. I think you're sensing the importance of multimodality in all of this work. I needed Dee to be able to build and not just write with written words what it was he was trying to express. I needed to be able to audio record and not just put a grade on a draft that he produced with written words. If I had asked Dee to produce that story hook with letters and words first, he would have produced nothing, and he might even have begun acting out in class. And he told me that. This ability to invite multimodal expression and our ability to use technology tools to capture all of that, no matter what modes of expression are being used, it's helping us scale what my friend Dan Ryder always refers to as the barriers created by print. And print is what we privilege inside of our schools. But once we leave the world of academia, it's typically those people that are able to flip their dissertation into some sort of multimodal something that are the most influential in the field. Very few people read the books that I write cover to cover, but they sure show up if I offer to open a Zoom room and have a conversation. If I've created highly visual tools and resources, they'll look at my slide deck. These inquiry cycles are driven by a process that looks kind of like this, where we make the learning visible around a very specific purpose. I've spent a lot of time documenting the concept of resistance in writing workshops and classrooms. I don't have a theory about it. I'm not studying a practice or a strategy invented by someone else. I'm simply going to capture everything I see and hear relevant to resistance. And I'm going to create space for students to express it. I'm going to observe, and I'm going to either take pictures, scribble notes, capture audio, video, artifacts, and I'm going to spill all of that on a table, have conversations with people who can push my thinking and interpret that data. Then I'm going to invite my students to give me more perspective. This is what I'm thinking this means, everybody. What are you thinking about it? And 9 times out of 10, kids will say, you totally got that wrong. And that's why it's important to include their voice. I shared examples from West Valley with you and even my own writing studio that seem very complex. But I'm telling you that you can discover profound career and life-changing things by committing to documenting just one thing for this entire school year. I will tell you that personally, I've spent the summer kind of holing up. If you're connected to me, you're going to notice I haven't really been much of anywhere online this summer, and that's unlike me. I haven't kept up with my newsletter. I haven't been jumping into conversations on LinkedIn or elsewhere. I kind of spent the summer being really reflective because I got to tell you what, January kind of kicked my butt. My husband is a federal employee. My daughter and her partner, who she is now engaged to, both lost their jobs this year because of tariffs. We have all sorts of things going on in the world of education that compromise my work as a consultant. Kennedy, who's in the room, helped me solve a huge health insurance issue because my husband's data was corrupted by Doge and somebody ran up 76 faulty charges, uh, fraudulent charges on our health insurance. I was feeling a little disillusioned this summer. And that's just the real reality. And I know I'm not alone there. I know that there are probably a lot of people who have the perspective that things are all over, and they're not. But I really had to think carefully about how I'm going to show up authentically in schools this year and professionally this year. And I'm feeling really ground down. So I got to tell you that what I'm documenting for this year is when I feel most alive. Every day I'm going on Otter and I'm reflecting on where I felt most alive in my work. And I'm documenting that. And I'm noticing trends already. Small matters. When I'm feeling most alive, I am in close conversation with just a few people, or we're facilitating professional work in a very small setting, a small school, a small department, a small team, a small group of children. And I think small is mattering because it's helping me see better. It's putting me closer to people. I'm going to spend the entire year just documenting where I feel most alive. I've had colleagues that have documented the unexpected. The very first book that I wrote years ago was called Make Writing. It's the result of documenting the unexpected for a very long period of time. What you document for doesn't need to change from day to day. And while in West Valley, we documented largely around academic concerns and around standards and student skills that were related to them, these are some of the best ways to leverage documentation. And I can't tell you how often we've been able to solve academic issues and problems by documenting for these simple things. When did you feel most alive today as a learner? Or this week? Why? If you can capture your answer to that question over the course of time and go back and revisit that data, you're going to notice trends repeating. One of the big things that was totally unexpected in West Valley that we realized is that quitting is engagement. We have situations where faculty, staff, and students are quitting. And what we're realizing is that if we're really willing to lean in and closely read those stories, that is engagement. We need to engage with that. Quitting is not necessarily disengagement. When you start small as a documentarian, tools like this learning progression can be helpful. What does it look like to do this as a beginner? When I first began experimenting with documentation in my writing studio, it was around 2006, maybe. We had no idea what we were doing. We didn't even know it was called documentation. We just knew that we were taking notes about everything and gathering lots of pictures. And we wanted to be able to do action research. I remember my friend Pam saying, I feel like I keep doing this wrong because there are a lot of false starts. You might start documenting for how you feel most alive today, and you notice this pattern, right? Around I felt most alive when I was angry. That's weird. And I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that. Maybe I'm going to start documenting moments of anger so that I can study that a little bit more. It's not that you're failing if you have a false start. Oftentimes in the beginning in schools, leaders, like school administrators, say, I want you to document for main idea. But once you start doing that, you quickly start to realize that main idea isn't necessarily a satisfying study, that maybe we need to follow that kid who's building with loose parts. Maybe we need to lean into the quitters. Maybe that's the path that we really need to travel down. Over time, your documentation plans will shift in response to what you're learning, not only from students, but from the evidence that surfaces. And it's a very meandering sort of path. In the beginning, we tend to focus on academic stuff, things that are popping up in meetings that we're having, including data team meetings that are driven by a lot of test data, perhaps. But if you really begin to document, even documenting how well students identify main idea, what typically starts to show up are things that are not academic in nature. And they tend to have a huge influence on why students are performing the way that they do. It's the questions that we ask that help us look at the different bits of evidence we're bringing to the table better. So, in as much as we might think that it's the question that we're chasing, or the topic that we're documenting for, or the concept, or the evidence itself, the quality of the audio recording, or the picture, or the artifacts, as much as we think that that matters the most, I find that it's the questions that matter. How we're sort of inquiring around the evidence that we gather. I'm constantly asking, what really makes a question worth chasing? If you have my slide deck, you're going to see that I have this little chart here. Dimensions of society: social, political, racial, economic, environmental, cultural, religious, spiritual, educational, gender, legal, health, medical, technological, geographical, generational, socioeconomic, psychological. Yeah, all of that is a mess right now. Maybe it's always been this way. I'm wondering if you anticipated any of the predicaments that you're finding yourself in personally, professionally, as an American or otherwise. Did you anticipate those predicaments? If you had to pick one of those domains, which one has captured your heart? Try to get an idea in your head. Which of those domains is keeping you up at night right now? If you had to pick one or two, what's really weighing on you? Imagine you're having coffee with a trusted colleague who asks you to help them understand the heart of what you're grappling with. That predicament, the one that's on your heart, that's keeping you up at night. What key concepts within that predicament would you need to define and explore together in order for you to find some solutions? I'm pretty confident, although I haven't been able to participate a lot this week, your learning throughout the entire conference has had you bumping up against predicaments that weigh heavily on your heart. Some of you might even be feeling a little brush burned by some of the learning that you've done this week. What are the concepts that are at play there? I think of my own: authority, authenticity, liberation, control, reform, revolution. These are the concepts that are really at the heart of the predicament that I'm wrestling with. I could spend an entire school year documenting for just one of them. What am I noticing? What am I seeing relative to authority? What am I hearing? I don't have to understand what it means. Just capture the data, take the picture, keep the newspaper clipping, audio record the conversation, write the journal entry, keep what artifacts you find. Gather them over time and then affinity map them, cluster them, look for the patterns. What are you noticing repeating? How is that helping you understand the predicament better? How is it helping you understand what paths you might travel down in order to find satisfying solutions? Hope, I learned just last year, is not a feeling. Hope is cognitive. Hope is built on a path that is aligned to a goal. And if you have agency inside of that, you have hope. When one of those things, three things is missing, it starts to unravel. How can you create hopeful experiences for yourself, even inside of these very desperate times that we're kind of living through? How can you teach and lead and live with dignity? How can you be a steward of the stories that are unfolding around you personally, or a steward of the learning stories that students are living in front of you? This leads me to something else. I've been doing this work for a very long time, and recently there have been a lot of conversations in my world about the difference between a keynote provider or speaker, someone who does staff development around cooperative learning. I'm going to come train you up. Somebody who facilitates professional learning, and someone who is hired to help people define and solve very high stakes problems inside of schools. You cannot expect a keynoter to know how to solve or even see a pathway for solving high stakes problems inside of your context. And oftentimes people who are solving those problems aren't so good at keynoting. There are going to be all sorts of forces around us right now, me too, that try to turn our attention towards certain things and away from others, or that those people are going to try to influence us to think that something is or is not possible. I think it's going to be really important for all of us to document our learning, because it's not only going to bring dignity, it's going to help us find hope. It's going to help us see what our personal or professional goal might be, what pathway we might find in our very specific and unique context, and where we need to seek agency in order to solve it. I think these are important skills to model for students and young people as well. When children see us documenting our learning and inviting them to do the same, it creates a profound cultural shift. So there will be lots of people who want you to take a deductive approach with documentation. Hey, we're going to do a lot with trauma-informed practice this year in our school. We're all going to document for trauma and around what we notice with trauma-informed practice. Or we just gave the state assessment and none of our students can complete literary analysis work very well. We're going to document for that. Or like we started in West Valley, students were struggling to identify and also compose main ideas. We only documented for that. Jigsaw is a profoundly effective instructional strategy. Comes up in Hattie's research all over the place. You might be testing the effectiveness of Jigsaw. All of these are deductive ways to document learning. I want to challenge you to pursue a more inductive approach. If you have a predicament you're in, a problem you're trying to solve personally or professionally, what are the concepts related to it? document what you see and hear for a long stretch of time. Try not to rush to have an answer. Let the patterns emerge out of the documentation. You may notice things you wouldn't have otherwise. Oftentimes, documentation is like working a kaleidoscope. We decide, I am going to document to try to understand myself as a teacher better. I'm going to do this in my first period class. I'm going to document what I notice about my students during my mini lessons. And this is hat tip right here to Trevor Alio, who's in the room. I riffed off of a tool that he once designed for his work. It really helped me understand the way that we might be able to take elements and concepts related to people, places, practices, processes, and products. People often ask, like, what do I document for? These are ideas. These are some of the things that you might study. But the power comes when, as Trevor taught me, we begin to notice the relationship between those things and how one of them might be affecting the others. On this particular slide, I'm sharing my digital documentation notebook with you. If you click on this link, it'll open up this Google Drive folder. I add to this all the time. Those of you who want to take a deeper dive into examples are going to find lots of them here. These are tons of case studies of how I've facilitated documentation or done it for my own purposes in a lot of different contexts. If you open up that side tab, you'll be able to navigate it. There's also a table of contents here. And I encourage you to take a look at some of these stories. This was the very first time that I documented my learning, and I didn't know that that's what I was doing. This was a learner in my writing studio who came in and told me as well that he hated writing, and for 3 days cried, until I finally said, if you came to writing studio tomorrow and I told you you didn't have to write anything, what would you rather do? And he said, well, I would rather play with my Legos. And so I told him to bring his Legos. And this young writer ended up building a story that was, of course, far more compelling than any other story that was being written in the room. And I took a picture simply because I wanted to remember this moment. I didn't know what documentation was, but this was the story that started it all. One of the things you'll notice in the notebook is that I'm linking you up to the protocols that I've used. So for every single case study there, I'm giving you the how-to. And you are welcome to use, adapt, and share this however you might like, for non-commercial purposes, of course. The most profound thing that I do as a documentarian is I try to invite a lot of diverse perspective taking. I try to ask myself whose voices or perspectives are not in the room when we're interpreting evidence of learning. And that's something that I try to do personally as well as professionally. Making sure before we document to co-create that project with the people that we're trying to understand is really powerful. And sometimes, I used to maintain this assumption that 3 or 4-year-olds were not exactly good collaborative partners. They're some of the best. They help me design the most interesting documentation projects. Inviting right before you begin critical friends. I'm about to kind of dive into this study. I'd really love you to push my thinking, challenge my thinking, help me notice my biases, take the charge out of that right from the get-go. As you're documenting, I had this great conversation with Andrew Podol earlier this year through my work with the New York State Plan Pilot. We invited teachers who were involved in the pilot this year to document their learning as they're shifting to inquiry-based learning and the use of a portrait of a graduate. Andrew hopped on a call with me and very generously told me how he went through a very similar experience as a leader, and he wished that he had documented his learning as a principal. I document my learning as a professional learning facilitator Teachers document their learning from students. And when students also document their learning, the through lines are very interesting. And the connections that we make between what we're noticing keep us honest too. When we interpret data, one of the reasons why learning walls and scrapbooks and Seesaw and tools like Unruler, especially with secondary level learners, are so powerful is you're inviting the kids that you're studying or the adults to share their perspectives first. And that can help you make sure that your interpretation is not off. I'm going to pause here, and I've kind of thrown a lot at you in terms of practical approaches over the last 20 minutes or so. I'm going to move you back into the last breakout room of the day. I want you to work with this. What's resonating? What questions or challenges are coming up? We're going to go into the breakout room for about 10 minutes. I'll try to stop in both of them too, and then we'll come back to debrief. And the rooms are open. All right, welcome back, everyone. We're coming up to the end of the session, and I'm dropping a question into the chat for all of you. I'm hopeful that because I'm rounding out and closing out the sessions for the conference, that you have lots that you're noticing. If you were to pull the snapshots that maybe are in your own mind of the salient points of the conference for you, if you were to pull forward into your own imagination those images or those words that you heard, conversations that you had that were most compelling to you over the last several days, what patterns emerge? How has your thinking changed this week? I'm going to invite you to drop your thoughts about that into the chat as a bit of a ticket out the door. And on the last slide, I hope that you'll stay in touch with me. You can click on the link that's there. It says, please stay in touch. That's how you'll find me online. I plan to show up in a more consistent way there starting on August 1st. But I'm so grateful to all of you for coming, and especially to friends who are in the room, like Trevor and Kennedy. And I see Beth here as well. These are people I've known for quite some time and in different contexts, and it means a lot to me that you dropped in. But the rest of you, if you are new acquaintances, I hope that you'll stay in touch. I hope that as you try some of these ideas in your classroom or grapple with some of the tensions inside of it, you'll reach out to me, even through email. I'm really responsive and try to build community with everybody that I get to learn with. Thank you for being here, everybody. I hope that you've enjoyed the conference. It has been an honor to be the last one with you.
And we are so thrilled that you are the last one to host us. Oh my
Mm.
goodness. I was mid-sentence on here, but certainly feel free to share these things in here, and or if you wanted to copy those over into the Discord. Again, just knowing that while Chris has been really diligent about getting the videos added to that welcome doc and with the Zoom transcripts and with the Zoom chats and everything else, take us a couple clicks to get there. Take some time. The Discord's right there. It's always on, etc. So, yeah, I think the only other announcement is that our HRP closing session will be in just, oh gosh, in 14 minutes here on the same link. We'll be real brief as far as, chatting at you, but then really getting us working together to build something collaboratively that will similarly represent, where you are at the end of an incredible and busy 3 days of learning. So join us back here in 15 minutes for that. But
Heads
thank you
up,
so
just a
much, Angela.
logistical thing. Again, appreciate you all being here. It will be the same link, but we are going to shut down this call for the next call because I realized it gets a little wonky with the recording. So we'll see you on the other side. Again, that link is in Discord. It's on the welcome guide. It's the same link that you're already on. Hope to catch you all there in about 15 minutes. All right. See you all soon. Good luck out there. Have a good one.